Gall makers are insects or mites that play chemical tricks with host plants. These pests secrete or inject chemicals that act as plant growth regulators. The chemicals force abnormal plant growths, and the insects or mites use these growths as places to hide and use as sources of food. The galls are generally divided into open galls or closed galls. Open galls always have some natural opening through which the pest can escape once it finishes its development. In other galls, the insect is entirely encased in host plant tissues, and the larva or adult insect has to chew its way out of the gall to escape. As you might expect, insects with sucking mouthparts and mites make open galls. But insects that have larvae or adults with chewing mouthparts generally make closed galls. Open galls are produced by insects and mites that have sucking mouthparts. The galls have a natural opening through which the pest escapes when it is time to leave the gall. This witch hazel cone gall has been cut down through the middle. The aphids that live inside are visible, as is the small hole in the bottom of the gall. This hole is blocked with hairs to keep predators out, but it opens wider when the gall dries, which allows for the aphids to depart and move to their next life cycle stages. Closed galls are produced by insects that have chewing mouthparts as larvae or adults. The galls are generally solid masses of host plant tissues in which the gall insect larva develops by eating some of the tissues or absorbing nutrients secreted by the tissues. The larva or adult gall insect has to chew an emergence hole through the gall tissues in order to emerge. This oak apple gall has been cut in half to expose the gall wasp pupa inside the tissues. When we covered aphids, I didn't include aphids that produce galls. There are several aphids that induce galls to make bladder or pouch-like galls. One of the most spectacular is the elm coxcomb gall aphid that attacks slippery elm. This aphid overwinters its eggs on elm branches. In the spring, as elm leaves begin to expand, the eggs hatch into stem mothers that move to the undersides of these leaves. Their feeding induces the formation of an elongate bladder that extends upward. The aphid moves into the pouch and gives live birth to aphid nymphs that complete their development within this gall. By midsummer, the gall tissues desiccate and the pouch opening separates to allow for the aphids to escape. The summer forms feed on the roots of sedges and grasses until the fall, when the sexual forms are produced that fly back to the elm and lay eggs for overwintering. The poplar petiole gall aphid has spring stem mothers that produce a ball-shaped gall on poplar and aspen leaf petioles. These galls have a slit for the summer adults to escape and fly to plants that are in the cabbage family. Again, the summer aphids feed on the roots of those cabbage plants until the fall, when sexuals are formed again that fly back to the poplars. The spiny witch-hazel aphid has an even more complicated life cycle that takes 2 or more years to complete. On witch-hazel trees, eggs overwinter. In May to June, the stem mothers hatch and move to new flower buds, where their feeding causes the tissues to form a spiky pouch in which she gives birth to winged summer aphids. In July, these galls dry and a slit opens at the side of the gall. The summer aphids fly to birch trees where they give birth to nymphs on birch leaves. These nymphs crawl from the leaves and move to small branches where they settle down and form a scale-shaped form. These complete their development, but overwinter without giving birth until the next spring, when new birch leaves begin to expand. The spring nymphs begin to feed on the undersides of the expanding leaves, which causes the leaves to thicken and become corrugated. The spring nymphs mature quickly and also give live birth to more aphids. By June, the aphids within the birch leaf pseudogalls give birth to winged sexuals, and these fly back to witch hazel leaves to mate. After mating, the females lay eggs at the bases of flower buds, but these eggs don't hatch until the following spring. We've already covered the hackberry psyllid galls, spruce gall adelgids, and the hickory leaf stem gall phylloxerans when we discussed those types of insects. I just wanted to remind you that these hemipterans are some of the other families of insects that produce galls on plants. Most of these are aesthetic pests, but the Coulee spruce galls can stunt the growth of Colorado spruces when the tree is susceptible to this pest. Since this gall causes the death of an entire shoot, heavy infestations can cause the plants to have few normally expanding shoots. Not all trees have the same susceptibility to these gall-forming adelgids, and having Douglas fir nearby can also influence the amount of galling. In much of Ohio and Indiana, where Douglas fir is rarely used, this gall is almost never seen. Remember that the gall-forming psyllids don't alternate host plants, and the phylloxerans can alternate forms. But these forms stay on the same host plant. Many cecidomyid midges have larvae that cause galls. In fact, this family is called the gall midges, though many other species don't actually form galls. There are many species of vein gall midges that attack various species of deciduous plants. We can see the undersides of a shingle oak leaf with vein galls. These are pouch galls with the openings on the upper leaf surface. By pulling the leaf from the sides, we can expose the tiny midge maggots that are feeding within the leaf tissues within the galls. The maple vein galls are most common on sugar maple. Again, we can see the openings on the upper surface and the pouches on the undersurface. Most of these gall midges overwinter as midge pupae in the soil under host trees. In early spring, when the new leaves are about half expanded, the adult midges emerge, mate, and females lay eggs along the leaf veins on the upper surface. The new maggots stimulate cell growth that forms the pouch in which they move as the pouches develop cavities. In a month to 6 weeks, the larvae finish their development, then drop to the ground to pupate and remain inactive until the next spring. Most of these gall-forming midges are considered to be aesthetic pests. Some of the gall midges cause vein galls on host leaves, and others settle on leaf margins, which causes the edge of the leaf to fold over and become thickened. These are often called leaf folding or leaf margin galls. A common species does this on oak, and it is usually missed unless leaves are carefully inspected. Every few years, this pest can be very common on oaks, and the galls are of little consequence. However, there is a predatory mite called the oak itch mite that feeds on the maggots, and once they have eaten all the maggots, the mites will emerge from the galls and search for other insect eggs for foods. Unfortunately, these can drop from the trees onto the skin of humans, where they can cause severe skin welts. The welts are red and itchy and look a lot like chigger bites, but the welts are usually on the upper body torso, not on the lower body torso where chiggers would usually bite. There's nothing that can be done to control these mites other than recommend that the hikers, joggers, and bicycle riders avoid being under oak trees at the time these mites are emerging. That is usually in July and August. Fall cypress trees often develop what looks like strange seed cones on the tips of their compound leaves. These aren't seed cones, but the galls of another midge, the Cypress twig gall midge. The galls can appear pink or green, but are usually pineapple-shaped and covered with white waxy material. If you break open the active galls, the bright orange larvae can be found, or, if broken later on, the orange with black wing pad pupae can be found. This pest can have 2 generations in Florida, but 1 generation over most of the rest of North America. Larvae and pupae remain in fallen galls during the winter, and adults emerge in May to mate. Females lay up to 120 eggs at the bases of newly expanding leaf needles. The larvae stimulate the growth of new galls, in which they develop for much of the remainder of the summer. The Honeylocust Podgall midge is another midge species that commonly attacks the leaflets of honeylocust trees. The midges overwinter as pupae located in the soil under host trees. In early spring, just as new leaf buds expand, the midges emerge and females lay eggs along the veins of expanding leaflets. Each maggot can cause a leaflet to fold over into a cone-shaped gall. The midge larvae feed on the leaf tissues within the gall and can complete development within a couple of weeks. These larvae drop to the ground, pupate, and emerge within a week to 10 days. New adults seek out newly expanding leaves and repeat the life cycle. In some locations, 4 to 7 generations can occur before honeylocust trees stop setting out new leaves. At this time, the dropping larvae form pupae that don't emerge as adults until the following spring. This pest can cause severe damage to certain cultivars of honeylocust trees, and early treatments are necessary to stop extensive leaf damage. Effective treatments may have to be made as early as late March and early April, when the first new leaf buds begin to expand. The dogwood club gall midge forms elongate, spindle-shaped galls at the tips of flowering dogwood branches. This pest overwinters as prepupal larvae in the soil under flowering dogwoods. In the spring, the larvae form the pupa, and the adults with orange abdomens and yellow thoracic areas emerge in May. These mate and lay eggs at the bases of the leaves of actively growing branch tips. The eggs hatch into orange maggots that use their mouth parts to rasp into the petioles of terminal leaves, and they eventually end up in the pithy area of these terminal growths. This causes the tip to swell slightly into the club-shaped gall. 1 to over 30 maggots can inhabit this gall during the summer. At the time of leaf drop, the maggots rasp holes in the walls of the gall and drop to the ground to overwinter. Heavy infestations can result in stunted growth and poor flowering. We've already discussed some of the thrips that cause gall or gall-like distortions on their host plants. The most common of these is the Cuban laurel thrips, which we also called the fig leaf-folding thrips. We also mentioned that many of the Aphid mites cause abnormal plant growths that are generally considered to be galls. Bladder and spindle galls are common on many plants, and these are often caused by these tiny mites. Here's an image of Arrhenium mite activity on an oak. To many, this looks like some kind of mildew or fungal attack, and only microscopic examination can determine if Aphid mites are the cause of the symptoms. Aphid mites can also get into plant buds and cause extreme distortion of the tissues. The pine rosette mite is one such pest. You can see that it causes an extreme proliferation of shoot and needle buds that form a bushy gall-like growth. We will now move to the insects that make closed galls. The vast majority of these pests are gall wasps in the family Cynipidae. As a note, there are some weevils that make galls on plants, mainly pines and other conifers, and a few caterpillars that induce plant galls, but these are rarely issues in landscape plants. Our first example is kind of a fun species, the jumping oak gall. The black to chestnut brown adult wasp is very tiny, being less than 1/10 of an inch long. The wasp has a complicated life cycle that alternates between sexual, gamic, and asexual, agamic generations. Agamic females become active as the oak leaf buds swell in the spring. The females insert eggs into the tissues, and the larvae develop inside flattened swellings. By May, male and female wasps chew their way out of these galls. These mate, and each female can insert up to 70 eggs into the lower surface tissues of expanding oak leaves. The eggs hatch in about 3 weeks, and the larvae initiate small round galls which arise from the lower leaf surfaces, but each one produces a raised swelling on the upper leaf surface. Each gall is connected by a narrow connection to the leaves. By August, these galls can detach from the leaves and drop to the ground. The larvae within the tiny ball-shaped galls can flip rapidly within the gall space, which causes the gall to roll or jerk around. Supposedly, this is done to move the gall into a protected crack or crevice of the soil. Eventually, the larvae pupate and form adult wasps, but these females do not emerge until the following spring. Oaks alone are known to have over 300 species of gall wasps that attack them. Most of the galls are formed on leaves, but others utilize bud, flower, branch, trunk, and root tissues to form galls. In this next series, I want to show some of the strange progression of leaf gall forms. Many of the species of gall wasp induce galls that are solid masses of tissues with a larval chamber being formed in the center of the gall. Most of these galls have photosynthetic tissues along the outer surface that continue to make sugars and other nutrients. These are transported to the center capsule where they are secreted into the larval chamber where the larva ingest them. Many of these galls have hard woody tissues, and these are usually called bullet galls because they are about the size of an old musket bullet. This one, however, has soft tissues which are somewhat see-through, hence the name translucent oak gall. Oak apple galls generally have a green outer covering, and inside there will be oak leaf tissues that form strands which support the larval capsule, which is still located deep inside the gall. Again, nutrients are transported through the strands to the larval capsule. There are many species of these galls, and some are only a ½ inch in diameter, while other species can form galls that are nearly 2 inches in diameter. Most are considered to be cosmetic pests and don't need to be controlled. Our last example of the synipid leaf galls is the oak Roly-Poly Gall. This gall is made on oak leaves, and it starts out as a small bullet gall having a solid mass of tissues from the outside to the larval capsule. As the gall enlarges, the larval capsule separates from a thick outer ball of cells. The larval capsule simply rolls around the gall opening as the oak foliage is blown in the wind. The truly amazing thing about this gall is that the outer tissue ball undergoes photosynthesis and cells secrete liquid nutrients into the opening. As the larval capsule rolls around, those oak cells pick up the nutrients and transport these to the larva developing inside. By mid to late June, the wasp larva finishes its development and pupates. In a week or so, the adult wasp chews its way out of the inner capsule and outer layer to emerge. These adults remain in the leaf litter until the following spring. The Gouty Gall and Horned-Beak Galls can be disfiguring pests of oak trees. Both can occur on oaks in the red oak family, but pin oak and shingle oaks are preferred by the Gouty Oak Gall wasp. The Gouty galls have a smooth surface, while the Horned-Beak galls have spike-like horns that arise on the gall surface. Like the jumping galls, these wasps have complicated life cycles, but in the case of these wasps, the asexual wasp females cause blister-shaped galls on oak leaves. But the sexual forms induce the enlarged gouty growths on oak stems and branches. Each oak tree has its individual susceptibility to these galls. Two oak trees can be side by side, with one being very heavily galled and the other one having virtually no galls. Female wasps emerge from the gouty growths in early spring to lay eggs on expanding leaf tissues. The eggs and larvae form thick blisters on the leaves. In late July into August, males and females emerge from these leaf galls, and the mated females insert eggs in clusters into the tissues of small diameter branches. These eggs don't hatch until the following spring, at which time the larva causes formation of woody growths. The larvae develop slowly, and galls can take 1 to 3 years to finish development. Because of the extended emergence period of the females from the Gouty galls, timing of an insecticide to control this pest is nearly impossible and would have to be repeated each spring for 3 years. The oak Horned-Beak Gall has a very similar life cycle to the Gouty Oak Gall. This one also has asexual females that emerge from old galls in the spring. These females insert eggs into leaf tissues which form blister-shaped galls, usually along a leaf vein. Males and females emerge from these galls, and mated females insert eggs back into the stems. This one is different in that the woody galls have unique horn-shaped protrusions from the gall wasp chambers located deep in the tissues. These horns often have secondary nectaries that secrete sugary droplets. These are highly attractive to ants, wasps, and bees. Again, this pest is nearly impossible to control, and the normal recommendation is to avoid using trees that have these galls on them. That can be difficult, as landscape oaks are often not determined to be susceptible or resistant until they are in the 3 to 5 inch caliper age. Both the Gouty Oak Gall and the Horned-Beak Gall tissues can be utilized by other insects. The oak gall clearwing is a fairly common borer that can develop in these tissues. Their presence doesn't harm the oak trees. The Mossy rose gall is another synipid wasp that forms galls on roses, mainly field rose or dog rose cultivars. The hybrid teas and knockout roses don't get this pest. The female wasps emerge from old gall tissues in April to lay dozens of eggs in tissues at the bases of expanding leaf shoots. The larvae that hatch induce the leaf tissues and stem tissues to form a multi-chambered woody gall that becomes covered with long divided threads of tissues that can look like moss or lichens. The galls can be red, yellow, or green depending on the host rose. The larvae develop slowly and generally mature by the fall. Pre-pupae and pupae overwinter so that adults can emerge the following spring. This pest is a parthenogenic species with males rarely occurring. The Asian chestnut gall wasp was first detected in 1974 in North America, and it is suspected that it was accidentally introduced with some Asian chestnut cuttings that were used for grafting or rooting. It has since spread over most of North America east of the Rocky Mountains. Adult wasps emerge from old galls in late May through June. The females insert eggs into the leaf and flower bud tissues that have formed for the following year. The eggs hatch in about 40 days, but the larvae remain dormant until the following spring. When the new buds begin to become active, the larvae induce formation of woody galls out of the leaf and flower tissues. This causes poor flowering and poor seed set. The larvae develop within the galls but don't pupate until early the following spring. For nut growers, this pest has devastated chestnut production, and control is very difficult because of the prolonged dormancy periods. Common goldenrods get several galls. Two of the most commonly seen ones are the goldenrod bunch gall, which causes a bushy growth at the top shoots of plants. This one is caused by a small orange gall midge. A ball-shaped gall is commonly observed on the stems of goldenrods. This one is caused by another fly, but in this case the pest is a true fruit fly in the family Tephrididae. Another stem gall looks like a simple swelling of the stem, and this one is produced by one of the moths in the family Tortricidae. There are also leaf and flower galls on goldenrod. These are simply mentioned to demonstrate the diversity of gall insects and mites, and to emphasize that most are cosmetic pests that don't warrant controls. Galls can take on an amazing array of forms, and some can look like other galls, while others can be truly unique. The hickory leaf gall making midge makes a gall that can be very similar to a Psyllid gall that is formed on the same hickories. The elm sack gall aphids make galls that are much larger than a similar gall that is formed by an Areophyid mite on elm leaves. The oak spangle galls are generally disc-shaped galls that form on the undersides of oak leaves. It appears that almost every oak species has its own species of spangle gall maker, and they can range from pink, red, yellow to green in color. These are made by a small species of gall wasp. The sour oak gall is made by another gall wasp, and it can look like some kind of strange fungal growth on oaks.